Hi, I'm Leaf with Professional Equine Grooms. What makes a horse healthy? It's a little bit more than just riding and grooming. You can actually incorporate a lot of your barn chores into healthier habits for your horse. And your daily barn chores can actually become opportunities to help your horse have a really healthy life. When you think about your horse's stall, this is a great place to start maximizing their health care. The first thing you want is a stall with lots of ventilation, lots of big windows that keep the air flowing through. Even in the winter and really cold temperatures, keep the windows open so airflow is always coming through. Your horse is designed to live outside. And even if he's clipped, you can supplement that with blankets, and they should be just as comfortable in a house or a stall or a barn as they would be hanging out in a field. Having a lot of air through your horse's barn and living area also helps with any ammonia smells that start to creep up. Ammonia doesn't come directly from horse's urine. There's urea in your horse's urine, and that actually changes to ammonia when it's outside of his body. Ammonia is very caustic, and it can singe your horse's lungs and upper respiratory system and create burns on their skin. And it's just not pleasant to be around, especially when you consider that most horses are fed on the ground, which would be the source of any ammonia smells. Picking stalls more than once a day is a great habit to get into. When I'm cleaning stalls, I like to peel away the top layers and find the wet spots. And instead of using my fork, I use a snow shovel to scrape all the wet spot out. And let that area get some air. And to further kill some ammonia smell, you can use some zeolite products. This is stall refresher in the powder form. It also comes in granules. There's also some liquids that you can use. These actually absorb all of that dangerous ammonia and make your stall safer for your horse. Then you can cover that area with fresh shavings. And speaking of shavings, you might have to run some experiments to find the best shavings for your horse. Once you start to learn their habits about where they like to pass manure and urinate, you can learn the best types of bedding to put in those areas to absorb everything. And you might find using a combination of bedding is a really good idea. Sometimes on a base layer that's really absorbent, you could use a sawdust. Make sure there's no black walnut shavings in that sawdust at all, 0%. Or you could use some of those pine pellets that expand as they get wet. So if you put those as a base layer, those will absorb a lot of the liquids in the stall, be it urine or anything that your horse drips or splashes from his water. And then you can cover that with nice fluffy shavings that provide a nice place for your horse to rest. When you're choosing shavings for your horses, you want to think about two things: how absorbent that shaving is and how much dust there is, because you want to minimize the amount of dust that your horse is exposed to, especially because they eat off the ground. There are a lot of new different types of bedding that you can use for your horse, including rice hulls. You can also find cardboard bedding and recycled paper bedding. Banking your horse's shavings is also a great way to keep him away from the wall and reduce the possibility of him becoming cast in the stall. There's probably nothing more important for your horse's health, and that is his movement. Does your horse have plenty of time to play and exercise and have freedom around a larger area? And just like dogs and cats and humans, horses do enjoy playing, especially with other horses. And interacting with the herd stimulates their brains as well as keeps them moving. Horses also have exercise as part of their daily routine when we ride them. It's how we connect to their bodies and their minds, and that builds the relationship that we have with our horse partners. And as you get your horse ready for riding, and as you are riding, make a note of their attitude. How does their body feel? Are they a little bit sour? Are they unwilling to go forward? What sort of feedback is your horse giving you to tell you that maybe something's not right? Where you exercise your horse is also really important. And by where, I mean specifically what footing is underneath them. Lots of different types of footing are available for our horses, and it's always a good idea to keep them moving on some level on different types of footing, keeping safety at the forefront of the mind. Like, you don't necessarily want to go galloping around in super mucky weather. If footing is really hard or there's a lot of rocks, that can create a lot of concussion and maybe even stone bruises in your horse's hoof. So you want to be cognizant of only walking on harder or rockier surfaces, and maybe not even walking or anything on surfaces when they are frozen. Not only is it a concussion problem, it is a possible situation where they could slip and injure themselves. The footing on our riding surfaces also plays an important part of their overall health and soundness. We want to be sure that any footing that we ask them to do things on is not too hard, not too soft, not too deep, not too shallow. You're basically looking for the Goldilocks of footing. And all in all, your horse's movement plays such an important part in their mental health and their physical health, and it's your job to make sure that they stay that way by giving them lots of opportunities to be out in a paddock or out on the grass or out with friends or hacking around with you. And when horses are in a herd situation, it's really important that you start to notice the interactions of the herd to make sure everybody stays safe. Is everybody getting enough food? Do you see any horse that's gaining weight or losing weight while out with the herd? Are there some horses that are completely isolated from the herd and maybe could do with a different herd to be a part of? Or is there a horse or two that is getting really harassed by the other horses and comes in with kick barks and bite marks? That's something to consider about how they live and the groups that they live in. Let's talk about your horse's fencing. This can be really important in terms of keeping them healthy and sound. And ideally, your horse is in a situation where he's not even going to be tempted to go anywhere near the fence because he's got plenty of food inside the area and he's not going to be tempted to put a leg or a neck through the fence boards. That's how accidents happen. Sometimes horses will also play over the top of a fence and they can end up getting hurt or hurting their friend. Some horses develop what we call vices, and that is bad habits that are repeated over and over again. The prime example of this is a horse that uses the fence to hook his front teeth on and suck in a bunch of air as he pulls back and arches his neck. This is windsucking or cribbing, and it is detrimental to not only the fence, but also to your horse's teeth. Cribbing and windsucking also increase the horse's chance of developing colic, something that we definitely want to employ some preventative measures against. Some horses like to chew on the wood. Now, chewing on the wood is kind of a vice, but it's also kind of behavioral, and most experts think that horses that would chew do so because they're missing forage in their diet. They're not chewing enough hay or chewing enough pasture, and so to compensate for that, they chew on the fence. Now this can be a problem because one, it can interfere with their mouth. They can get splinters in their tongue, in their gums, in the corners of their mouth, and into their digestive system, in the esophagus and beyond. It also destroys your fence. Chewed up boards also create a lot of extra chores for you because you are having to take down and replace and repaint the boards that get too damaged. One thing you can do on your property to alleviate the tempting nature of fencing for horses is to add some hot tape or hot wire. This is actually a fatter type of wire. Hot tape tends to be really wide and flat, and then you can also get electric wire that is very, very thin but very difficult to see. So I prefer using something that is bright and easily visible. It attaches right to the fence and it provides a big deterrent for your horse getting near the fence. You might be wondering how strong the zap is on one of these, and it's actually less than a static shock. So when you keep your fencing safe, you keep your horses safe. Now, not all horses have a tendency to hang out and destroy the fences and get stuck in them, but it's nice to know that this is an option, using the tape to deter any horses that might develop a vice or already have a vice. And then we should think about how your horse gets his water. Water is really essential to a horse to have every single day. An interesting fact about horses. There was a study where the researchers discovered that horses prefer to drink really cold water, but if they drink really warm water, they drink much more of it. So if you're in a situation where your horse maybe has a tendency to become dehydrated, which can be pretty common in the winter, you want to make sure that their water offering is warm water, because they will drink it and they will drink more of it. If given a choice between cold and warm in the winter, they're going to pick the cold. It's a good idea to try and track how much water your horse is drinking, because anytime there's a habit of his that is a little bit different than the day before, that alerts you that something might be wrong. And one of those things is their water intake. Automatic waterers that you would find like in a field or in a stall can sometimes come with additional gadgets that allow you to measure how much water is used during the day. You just have to reset it every day. This gets a little tricky in herd situations though. And if you use buckets and tubs to water your horse, most of them have little imprints on the inside of it that tell you how many liters or quarts or gallons that bucket holds, so you can track that way. And if you just hang regular buckets on the fence or in the stall, you just have to learn how many buckets you're filling up every day. Now, if you're really worried about your horse's hydration, it's always a good idea to check his gums on a daily basis. His gums can tell you a lot about his health. They should be pink. They should be slippery. So when you slide your finger between his upper teeth and his lip, you should feel lots of slipperiness going on. Sticky gums or gums that are dry or a different color like red or bright pink or purple or blue indicate something's wrong, and you should probably call your vet. If you use buckets and tubs in the winter, make sure that they are rubber instead of that hard plastic, because should they freeze, as that water expands during the freezing process, it will crack the plastic tub. It won't crack a rubber bucket or tub. And you will need to come up with a way to keep your water source for your horses from freezing. You can get big muck tubs that have a heating element built into them that plug in and stay nice and warm and unfrozen. You can have heating elements added to automatic watering systems, and you could also buy regular like insulated jackets to wrap around your buckets to help keep that water from freezing. And one last thought, make sure that your horse's trough or bucket or tub is clean. If you don't want to drink from it, your horse probably wouldn't want to drink from it either. How your horse eats is also really important as it pertains to his health. Ideally, a horse's diet is primarily forage-based, meaning there's hay pellets, cubes, fresh pasture, things like that, grass. And while in a perfect world, all the horses would live outside on pasture 24/7, but that's not feasible for a lot of reasons. One, land can be at a premium. Two, you might have a lot of horses for a small bit of land. Three, you might have a really harsh winter where all of your pasture is covered in snow for most of the season. You also might have a horse that is high laminitis risk, and keeping them on grass pasture 24/7 is not great for their metabolic health. So we usually supplement any pasture that they get with a long stem forage or a hay pellet or a hay cube, depending on your horse's dental and digestive needs. And we typically say it's nice for horses to have food 24/7, but the reality is they also need to sleep, and they also need to play, and they also need to move around. So horses typically in the wild will eat about 17 or 18 hours a day. But for domesticated horses like the ones we have, we want to be sure that there's some sort of forage that they can chew on whenever they want. A good way to do that is to have some slow feeder systems. Now, a hay net is about as easy and simple as you can get in terms of slow feeders for horses. But a lot of times they are hung a little bit high, and that can twist and make your horse's neck stiff and uncomfortable. But if the hay net is low, there's a chance they could get a horseshoe or a hoof stuck. So you could put a hay net in a tub, or you could find another sort of slow feeder system for hay in a paddock where there's a big box with a grate on the top. There's lots of options for you, homemade and store-bought. And also thinking about the way that horses eat. Their necks are long, they're designed to have their heads near the ground to eat, because that allows their lungs and their upper respiratory systems to clear out. When they eat standing up, there's not as much opportunity for that to happen. So we want to find a system where our horse can eat at ground level, but not necessarily at the ground, because there's a lot of stuff that they can pick up as they're munching along that can live in their stomach and not pass, like sand. That can create an increased risk for colic, specifically sand colic. And some horses might end up chewing a lot of gravel-like substances that could actually interfere with their teeth. So let's figure out a way to feed them at the ground level while protecting them from ingesting extra sand and gravel and things like that. Tubs and slow feeder systems that rest on the ground are great. You could also use mats in a designated feeding area. You can also use muck tubs. And there are slow feeders available for horses that are eating grains and pellets. And speaking of feeding grains and pellets, a best case scenario is that your horse has several rations of this throughout the day instead of one big one. We want to minimize kind of the impact of all of that intensely concentrated feed on their digestive systems. So spreading it out over the day is the best way to do it. Think of it this way. As much as we would love to sit down and eat a whole bag of cookies, our stomachs might be a little bit upset about that. But if we eat a whole bag of cookies over the course of a day, we still get to enjoy the cookies, but we're probably not going to have an upset stomach. Now let's talk about keeping our horses healthy by keeping the feed room healthy, mainly as it relates to rodents and other critters that can live in your horse's feed room. Now, rodents specifically are masters at finding a source of food and creating a home, usually within about 20 feet or so of that food source, so they don't have to go that far to get fed. And so you know that your feed room and any other place that you might keep treats or your own lunch or anything like that is an area that rodents would kind of be attracted to. And that's where you can focus your rodent control measures. And the main reason we do this is because rodents do a lot of things at the barn. They leave droppings which are messy and can sometimes contain diseases that we don't want to get and we don't want the other animals on the property to get. They attract ticks to the area, and we definitely don't want to get ticks on ourselves or our horses. They can create lots of little nests using your saddle pads and your horse's blankets by destroying all of the fabric and creating little mouse houses using stuffing. What sort of preventative measures do we need to do at the feed room and any other food storage areas? One is to keep everything clean and sealed. Always be sweeping the area, not only to get any drops of food scraped up, but also to look for rodent droppings that might signal you that there is something living in the area. Having a barn cat or a barn dog is also a great idea. You can also set mechanical traps around the area, and these are the little snap traps. You don't need to bait them with cheese like in the cartoons. All you need to do is you need to put them up against the wall, because mice and rodents will walk along those borders up against the wall to find their food and go back home. And what they'll do is they'll just walk right on top of it, and that will take care of that. If you use sticky traps or any sort of a poison, you are definitely running the risk that your barn cat or your barn dog or even a happy, friendly critter coming across your property is going to get stuck, and it's sometimes not a great idea. Fully secure all of the lids to your supplements. You don't want any opportunity for critters to get into a supplement tub. Even better, if you have a separate container that you can put all of your tubs into, like a cabinet or this flip top, that's another layer of protection against rodents. And bagged feeds and grains, you could put them in another tub. Make sure the top seal is really rodent proof and really tricky to get into. You can get lots of these storage containers that have a nice screw top lid that is a lot better than a metal trash can where it just snaps. And when your barn chores to include taking care of the feed room, you are ultimately just improving your horse's quality of life and overall health. Now let's talk about biosecurity at home when you're doing your barn chores, and especially at horse shows. Now, what does biosecurity really mean? It's just It's an umbrella term that means having a standard of care for your horse and the environment as to reduce the chance of your horse passing on or getting infected by a bacteria or a virus from their environment. I guess it's a fancy way of saying just keeping your horse safe from getting ill. And you might hear sometimes in the news that a horse show has had to stop being a horse show and the horses have had to isolate because there's been a case of strangles or EHV1 go through. Strangles is a bacterial infection that affects the horse's head and neck usually, and they can create big sores filled with pus and other discharge that sometimes rupture. Your horse might also have pretty intense nasal discharge with a case of strangles, and it's highly contagious from horse to horse, like at a barn or at a horse show. EHV1 is a viral infection that is also easily transmitted between horses. It can create high fevers and flu-like symptoms, but it also has a neurological component in some horses that can create really complex neurological issues and sometimes even death. So when we are in these environments, it's important to keep our horse safe by minimizing the exposure to other horses. Now, to start some really good biosecurity measures at a showgrounds or at a new barn, it's important that wherever your horse is going to live, that you clean the area. Not only looking for nails and other things that might be left in the wall from a previous tenant that could cut your horse or scrape him, but you want to make sure that there's good footing, there's fresh new bedding, not old bedding from the horse before, and maybe you even spray down the walls with a water to bleach ratio. You could use 1 part bleach to 10 parts water to wipe down the walls and the doors, and especially the area around where your horse might have a hay net or some water buckets. Also be sure that your horse can't reach his head out of the stall and touch a neighbor. Keep in mind that humans, you and me, we are experts at spreading disease. And when we're at the showgrounds, we can easily do that by touching a horse and then coming back and touching our own. We don't want to do that. When you're at the showgrounds, don't touch other horses. It's really that simple. If you accidentally do, that's fine. Just wash your hands before you touch anything else. You also don't want to share any of your grooming supplies, any of your buckets, or anything else that might touch your horse. Saddle pads, bits, anything that belongs to you and your horse needs to stay with you and your horse and not be shared. Vaccinations are another great way to protect your horse's health. They are designed to be given usually twice a year, spring and fall, by your veterinarian, and they protect your horse against a whole gamut of possible diseases transmitted by other horses, by insects, by the air. And there's also something else that you can do every single day to stay ahead of your horse's health, and that is take their temperature. This is really important, especially if you've been traveling or at a showgrounds or have arrived at a new barn, because when a horse develops a fever, that is sometimes the first sign that they're not feeling well. Many horses can have fevers and still eat and drink and pass manure and act completely normal, even while there is something brewing in their bodies. So if you keep on top of your horse's temperature and you know what his normal temperature is so you can compare, that's a great thing that you can do to help them stay healthy for a lot longer. If you find that your horse has an illness or has a fever, it's a great idea to isolate them so that if there's something contagious going on, the rest of the barn's not going to be affected. It's also nice to know when you're traveling to a horse show if they require a Coggins test. Now, Coggins is a blood test that your vet does and sends to the laboratory to test for a disease called EIA, which is equine infectious anemia. There's no treatment and there's no cure for this disease, and it is highly transmissible. So a lot of showgrounds require this negative test before you can bring your horse on the grounds. Now, let's just say you're traveling across state lines to go show your horse. In that case, you're going to need a Coggins test, but you also need a veterinary certificate called the ICVI, which stands for the Interstate Certificate of Veterinary Inspection. It's a mouthful. And for one of these, your vet will examine your horse and make sure that they are fit and healthy at the time of examination, and that paper will need to travel with you if you cross state lines. Some showgrounds might also require that. So there's lots of things that we can do to help our horses be happy and safe and sound and healthy. And it goes way beyond just riding and grooming.